I believe we are live. Okay, so this is the live discussion for weekly rotation week 4? Question mark. Um, this was the unique voices rotation. I picked these 3 albums because the singers of all 3 albums have pretty unique voices. Not completely unique, as I'll go into as I talk about them, but they're not the kind of sound that you typically get when you're listening to music. They're not your radio friendly um, kind of twee pop sound that you hear a lot these days. So, what albums did we listen to this week? We listened to Timbre's Creep On, Creep On, Adam Ward's A Wasteland Companion, and Dark Dark Dark's Wild Go. Um, so, all 3 of these, as I mentioned, have singers that, in the case of Timbre and Dark Dark Dark, are kind of kind of creepy, as Timbre's album uh, title suggests, and M Ward is less on the creepy spectrum, but definitely more on that interesting kind of twangy, almost rockabilly sound, and that'll pop up a couple times as well as I go over these. So Creep On, Creeping On is Timbre's second album, which followed their self-titled and precedes their most recent album, Hot Dreams. Creeping On, and their self-titled album are quite similar, whereas Hot Dreams is a very different sound, much more jazzy, much more, well, not much more upbeat, but it's less creepy. And there are still some creepy vibes that you get from his recent album, but it's not as overtly creepy. So for me, Timbre's Creeping On is one of my favorite albums in recent years because it's so different. I still haven't found any band that is quite like them, save one named Tassiomancy, who is on the same label and whose album was produced by Taylor Kirk, the vocalist for Timbre. So really, the only place to go for that type of sound is Timbre, which is unfortunate because I really dig it, and I think there's a large audience for it that really look for that. Dark 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 kind of goes down that road, that sound, uh, but not entirely. So let's take a look at the track list for Creep On Creeping On rather. So let's switch this up here. Okay, so let's take a look at this. There really isn't one particular song on this album that I dislike. As I mentioned, this is one of my favorite albums in recent years, and it really holds up. The entire album, each song is its own kind of thing. Bad Ritual has this bass line that kicks in when the song starts that you don't really see anywhere else in the album, but it somehow sets the tone for the whole thing, and you kind of understand within the first second or two what is going to happen. Just the the deep minor note that gets hit, and you realize, oh, this is I wasn't convinced by the album title, but this sound has convinced me that this is going to be a kind of dark, dreary, creepy experience, and this is exactly what you get. And the whole thing to me is really a kind of adventure in the wrong side of obsession. And as the character, or Kirk himself, maybe, I'm not entirely sure if this is a concept album or Kirk's personal experience coming to light. Uh, but songs like Bad Ritual and Creeping On, and Lonesome Hunter and Woman, they all have this theme of unrequited love and almost stalkerish feel to them, especially in Lonesome Hunter when he explicitly says, if we can take a look at the lyrics for Lonesome Hunter, let's see if this renders here. Uh, yeah, well, you have every reason to be frightened. I've done some truly awful things, and that's exactly what you feel on this on this album. And Creeping On It's exactly what he sounds like in the title. He he doesn't want to stop obsessing about this person. He just wants to keep creeping on, as it were, and that continues throughout the whole thing. He continues in Woman, where he continues obsessing over the lonesome hunter. He he talks essentially about stalking her, and then Do We Have Power, or Do I Have Power, rather, almost concedes the fact that he'll never be able to change himself, and can I? And he begs, can you just let me pretend that we're together, which is uh, again creepy. It's the wrong side of the tracks, but I think that's what is really powerful in music, is uh, letting you relate to characters that, and this is the same with really books and movies and any entertainment media like that, where you can somehow relate to someone that you can't sympathize with, but the music pulls you in, or the movie pulls you in, a lot like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, where the movie has the main character that you want to empathize with deeply because he's put in this terrible situation. But you realize that at the start of the movie, he was a pedophile. So that's the power of these different types of media, is to let you uh, empathize with characters that you wouldn't usually empathize with. And that's kind of what happens in this album, where you shouldn't act like the character in this album acts. Uh, but regardless, it is a really beautiful sounding, albeit very dark, very creepy uh, sound to it. This is not something that um, would get much radio play, though I have heard it on college radio, as tends to be a bit more loose with that. Um, Timber Timbers, uh, I believe a couple songs from their first album were featured on Breaking Bad's soundtrack. I believe in season 3 or 4. Let me check what song that was. I believe it was Magic Arrow that was featured on their soundtrack, and that got them a bit of popularity, which I was quite happy about. The more people that find out about Timber Timbre is the better, in my opinion. They're a great band that deserves a lot of attention. Um, so that's about it for Creep On Creepin' On. Again, there's not really one song in this album that I don't really like. There are a couple that I love in particular. Bad Ritual, Blackwater, Woman is probably the most popular song on the album. I quite like it. And then Lonesome Hunter, which is just so dark that you can't help but love it as you're listening to it. And then Souvenirs is a really great closer to the album. It's just this unbelievably dour track to end the album with, because you think that there's going to be some conclusion to this story, either horrific or uplifting, and it's not. It's just the story ends and this character continues obsessing, um, and I think that's a real fitting uh, uh, ending track to that album. So what is next? Next we have M Ward's A Wasteland Companion, and this is quite different from the other two. Dark, Dark, Dark and Timber Timbre are a much creepier sound. They're much, uh, I keep using that word, but there's no really other word to describe it as creepy. Um, M Ward's Wasteland Companion is almost a rockabilly type sound. It's very much a that brand of folk music that leans towards country just enough so you can feel the banjo, but not so close that you're gonna buy a Alan Jackson T-shirt. So it fits right in that area where the Portlanders are comfortable listening to it, but not so far that it would get radio play in Alabama. So this whole album has Am Ward's vocals on it. Again, kind of really twangy, kind of 50s rock, uh, more rock and roll than rock. Rock sounds like a 90s Nirvana type sound, but this is very much a twangy rock and roll type sound. Uh, Almost, I don't really know who to compare it to, but uh, it's it's unique. You don't hear that sound much these days, even with bands that like a Gaslight Anthem that are trying to get that rockabilly type sound. You don't quite get as much as you do with this album. And this is probably the most radio friendly of the three. It's very upbeat. It is welcoming. The the instruments uh, are very bright. They're energetic. Um, you could probably hear this playing in a bar somewhere and people singing along to it. But there's also a really great piano work, particularly on "Primitive Girl," that opens the track, which follows into the two songs that feature Zoe Deschanel, "Me and My Shadow" and "Sweetheart," which lends itself well. I mean, on "Me and My Shadow," she has a bit part. Really, she joins in on the chorus a couple times. It's barely a feature. It's almost as if she stumbled in during recording and happened to sing along. Uh, and I think it lends itself well to the song. "Me and My Shadow" and "Primitive Girl" probably being my favorite tracks on this album, simply because they're really um, kind of tiptoey, if that makes any sense, with the piano. It sounds like almost as if a cat has jumped around the high register of the piano, and it's a very different album to listen to after Timbre Timbre, which gets you in a particularly low mood, followed by this album, which is so much brighter and happier, really. Uh, as you can tell by the ending track, "Pure Joy." Compared that to "Creep On, Creeping On," and you have a very interesting juxtaposition of music there. I'd say if there was a couple of songs that I didn't like, it was simply because I didn't even realize I was listening to them. They're very forgettable. There's a key in "Crawl After You" near the end of the album. Just I didn't even notice they were playing. Whereas songs like, again, "Primitive Girl," "Me and My Shadow," "A Wasteland Companion," the title track, "Clean Slate," the opener, you realize what's when they start playing, you can identify the song, which a couple of them you can't really do that with. But aside from that, I wouldn't uh, classify any of the songs again that I disliked too much. The This album kind of goes further towards that country type sound than some other artists that have a similar sound do, like Andrew Bird, for example, has quite a similar sound, but with less twang, um, less of that southern drawl to his voice. Um, and that's about it for that one. So the last one is "Dark, Dark, Dark." And I was into this band a couple of years ago, and I kind of fell in love with them. So let's take a look at their discography here. The first album I got to listen to is "Bright, Bright, Bright." And then I went backwards to "Wild Go." And again, this is it's not quite as dark as Timbre Timbre's music, but it is very droning, kind of definitely on the minor key type sound to it. Let's take a listen here. Yeah, very piano heavy. Female vocalist really lends her voice well to the music. I'd say if there was any band that sounded similar to this, "Dark, Dark, Dark" is almost a uh, if uh, "Bat for Lashes" was on a depressive streak, that would be around the same sound, kind of a dark uh, pop sound that is again different from the other two albums. Timber Timer is very much almost a swamp jazz, if that makes any sense, and M Ward's is kind of a rockabilly type sound, and Dark 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 is a depressing depressing pop, which is it's a very interesting combination. Usually, when you have a female pop vocalist, it is not on the minor key. It is it is very much a dark album, hence the band's name. There are, male vocals do come up on a few songs, and again, they don't intrude. They lend themselves well to the lyrics, and some uh, great collaboration on this album. I'd say my favorite two tracks are In Your Dreams and Daydreaming, and then a few had the same problem that I had with M. Ward's album, where there's a few of them, for example, Something for Myself and Right Path, and Nobody Knows. So the middle of the album, really, that completely forgettable, in my opinion. I just didn't even realize I was listening to them, and it kind of blended in with the rest of the tracks. I mean, it seems like Celebrate starts, and then it just goes right into Robert, and then I lost time, really. So Wild Go is one of the better albums by them, and again, I got it started with Bright Bright Bright, which is a really great short album to take a listen to. uh, Bat for Lashes is a band to look out for if you enjoyed this sound. In particular, let me check the name of their album. Whichever album had What's a Girl to Do on it. Let's find out here. Fur and Gold is a similar sounding band, but not quite is sorrowful rather. Um, but there are indeed some of the same creepy piano that happens along in the same vein as Dark Dark Dark. And that's about it for this week. So let's take a look at what's coming up in the coming week. So let's take a look here. Okay, so this upcoming rotation is, I picked these three albums because they're kind of on the right on the fringe of something that you might have heard of before, and you just haven't been brave enough to take a listen to it. You're almost guaranteed to not like one of these albums, but I highly encourage you uh, to give it a fair shake, and you might particularly enjoy one of them, or you might, in listening, find a related band that you enjoy. Johnny Truant's in the Library of Horrific Events is a really good, not quite deathcore, more just a hardcore death metal uh, band, and very uh, they need a lot more attention. Same thing with Velasca. Velasca is a indie folk um, band. They're produced by the one of the singers of Copeland, I believe. It's either Copeland or Good Old War. I don't recall which. And then finally, Canary Girls is a Buffalo. It's a previously Buffalo-based band from a coworker of mine. It's a 80s synth pop album, kind of in the vein of the 80s Nuevo rotation that we had a couple of weeks ago. And I really enjoy this. This is a great album featuring Bernice Radel, question mark. I'm not particularly sure how to pronounce that name, but it is great in my opinion, and needs some love. So take a listen to these three albums. Come back next week, tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, and create your own rotation. Thanks. See you guys next week.